The year was 1878, and the Arizona sun had already burned the sky into a deep orange by mid-morning. The heat rippled over the desert plains like a sheet of glass, making distant rocks shimmer like pools of water that did not exist. Through that lonely stretch of land rode a man named Clayton Reeves, a cowboy whose past was as dusty and unclear as the trail behind him. Clayton was not a man of many words. He spoke only when needed and smiled rarely. His face was weathered from long years under the open sky, tanned, lean, and marked with faint lines that told stories of wind, dust, and hardship. His eyes, though, were a sharp blue, the kind that caught the horizon before anyone else could see it. Some said those eyes had seen too much. Others said they were the only honest thing about him. He had been traveling alone for weeks with only his horse Dusty to keep him company. Dusty was a strong, dun-colored Mustang, stubborn, loyal, and almost as silent as his rider. Together they had crossed small towns, rocky canyons, and wide stretches of desert where nothing but the wind dared to speak. Clayton was searching for something, though if you had asked him what, he might not have known how to answer. Work, maybe. Peace, perhaps. He'd left behind a life of noise and danger in Texas. The cattle drives, the saloons, the endless quarrels over land and pride. Somewhere between the border and the mesas of Arizona, he'd decided he wanted quiet. But quiet in the desert wasn't peace. It was heavy, endless, and filled with the sound of your own thoughts echoing back at you. One afternoon, the heat became unbearable. Clayton could feel the sweat running down his back under his faded shirt. Dusty's breathing grew rough and the horse's hooves dragged in the sand. The air was so dry that even the cactus seemed to shrink away from the sun. Clayton lifted his canteen, shook it, and frowned, nearly empty. He scanned the landscape. To his right, low hills rose like sleeping giants. To the west, a cluster of cottonwoods shimmered faintly, a sign that there might be water nearby. Hope flickered in his chest and he tugged the reins gently. "Come on, boy," he muttered. "Let's see what luck brings." They rode toward the trees, the sound of hooves muffled by sand and sagebrush. Each step stirred small clouds of dust that hung in the still air before fading. After what felt like an hour, Clayton heard something faint in the trickle of water. It was soft, like a whisper in the wind. He pressed his heels into Dusty's sides, urging him forward. And then he saw it. Between two large rock formations lay a small lake, hidden away from the world. Its surface glimmered like polished glass reflecting the sky above. Around it grew tall grass and wildflowers, and the air was cooler, almost sweet with the scent of wet earth. To a man who'd been traveling for days through the desert, it looked like heaven. Clayton dismounted and walked to the edge, kneeling to cup the water in his hands. It was clear and cold, and the kind of water that made you close your eyes in relief. Dusty drank eagerly beside him, snorting as the coolness touched his lips. For a few minutes, Clayton let the peace sink in. The sound of cicadas filled the air, and a hawk circled far above. The place felt untouched, like a secret the desert had chosen to keep. But then something broke the silence. A laugh, soft, musical, and human. Clayton froze. He turned his head slowly toward the far side of the lake. Through the tall reeds he saw movement, figures faint and graceful near the water's edge. He stepped back into the shadow of a mesquite tree, careful not to make a sound. Through the golden light he could just make out 3 young women, their dark hair glistening as they moved in the water. They were bathing and laughing together, unaware of him. Their voices carried across the surface like a song. Clayton's first thought was not desire or curiosity. It was fear and embarrassment. He hadn't meant to intrude. He knew enough of the local tribes, the Apache especially, to understand that their customs were strict, and their sense of privacy and honor deep. To be caught spying, even by accident, could mean death. He took a cautious step backward, keeping low. Dusty snorted softly as if sensing his rider's tension. Clayton whispered a sharp shh and reached to calm him. But fate had other plans. The movement caught one of the women's eyes. She turned her head, a young woman with sharp features and striking eyes that gleamed like polished amber. For one long, frozen moment, their gazes met across the lake. Clayton's heart jumped, her mouth opened, and a startled cry tore through the still air. Within seconds, the other 2 women turned. Their laughter vanished, replaced by shock and alarm. Clayton raised his hands instinctively and stammered, "I didn't mean—" But before he could finish, they had vanished into the reeds, their voices rising in their native tongue. Clayton cursed under his breath. He hadn't meant to do wrong, but he knew how it must have looked. He hurried to his horse and mounted. The sun was dropping lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. He could still hear faint shouting from beyond the lake. He rode away fast, heart pounding. As the trail twisted through the red hills, his mind raced. He had wandered into sacred land, no doubt, the kind few outsiders were ever meant to see. The Apache were known to protect such places fiercely. What he had seen, what he was seen seeing, could easily be taken as an insult to their traditions. By dusk, he found a small clearing and decided to make camp. Dusty grazed quietly nearby while Clayton gathered dry wood and lit a small fire. As he sat beside it, eating the last of his jerky, he couldn't shake the image of those women, their startled eyes, their voices rising in panic. He hoped they would believe it had been a mistake. The desert night was silent except for the crackle of fire and the low howl of a coyote somewhere in the distance. Clayton leaned back against his saddle and stared at the stars. He didn't know that at that very moment, several miles away, a group of Apache warriors was being told of a stranger, a white cowboy, who had dishonored their daughters, and they would come for him. By morning, Clayton was up before the sun. He packed his saddlebag, doused the fire, and started to ride north. But a strange feeling lingered in his chest, a sense that he was being watched. Every few minutes he turned in his saddle, scanning the ridges and canyons. The desert looked empty, but something in his gut told him he was not alone. The Apache were masters of the land. They could follow a man's trail for days without being seen. By midday, he reached a canyon path and decided to stop in the shade. He gave Dusty water and rested against a rock, his hat tilted low over his eyes. For a brief moment, the sound of the wind lulled him toward sleep. Then, a snap of a twig. Clayton's eyes opened. He reached for his revolver but stopped himself. From the edge of the canyon came a faint rustle, and then silence. He waited. The air seemed to hold its breath. Nothing. He exhaled slowly, convincing himself it was just a rabbit or lizard. Still, when he mounted again, he kept one hand near his gun. He was a man who trusted signs, and the desert was giving him plenty. The sun fell low again before he found another suitable place to rest. A flat area near a dry riverbed. He built no fire this time. Instead, he lay in the quiet darkness, listening. Every crack of stone or whisper of wind made him tense. Somewhere far off, he thought he heard a drum beat. Faint. Rhythmic. He told himself it was only his imagination, but in truth it was not. The Apache were watching him. They had found his trail near the lake, and they had followed it through the night, silent as shadows, patient as the stars themselves. As the moon rose high above the canyon, Clayton Reeves, the quiet drifter who only wanted peace, was already part of a story far larger than he could ever have guessed. A story that would begin not with a gunfight, but with a misunderstanding beside a sacred lake. The sun had barely risen when Clayton Reeves began his ride north again. The desert was quiet, the only sound being the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves pressing into the sand. But the peace that once comforted him was gone. His mind was heavy with what had happened at the hidden lake, the laughter that turned into alarm, the startled faces of the three women and the echo of their voices calling into the distance. He had spent years traveling alone, avoiding trouble, but now trouble had found him in the most unexpected way. He didn't mean to see anything he shouldn't have. He had only been searching for water, yet a single mistake in this land could change a man's fate forever. The farther he rode, the more he felt that unseen eyes were on him. It was a strange feeling, like a whisper following him wherever he went. He tried to shake it off, telling himself that he was only being cautious. But deep down he knew better. The Apache were not known for letting strangers walk away easily, especially not when their customs had been broken, even by accident. By noon the desert wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of dust and something faintly smoky, like a distant fire. Clayton slowed his horse, scanning the horizon. He saw nothing but sand and sky, yet a chill ran through him. He decided to stop at the edge of a rocky ravine to rest and think. The silence was thick, but after a while he began to hear the faint drumming of hooves. Not one horse, several. He quickly mounted Dusty again, keeping low, and guided the horse toward a narrow trail between two cliffs. The sound grew clearer, closer. He pulled Dusty into the shadow of the rocks and waited. Moments later, 5 Apache riders appeared in the distance, moving fast across the plain. They were painted for the hunt, proud, disciplined, and silent. Clayton's throat tightened. They weren't wandering travelers. They were searching for someone. For him. He waited until they passed, then turned his horse away and rode into the canyon. The trail twisted and climbed, leading him through red stone walls that seemed to close in on every side. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, they'd catch up. And when they did, he could only hope they would listen before they decided his fate. By sunset, Clayton reached a small plateau. From there, he could see the desert stretching endlessly to the west. The lake lay somewhere behind him, hidden now by distance and rock. He stopped to rest for the night, lighting only a small fire that flickered weakly in the wind. He sat with his back to a rock, watching the stars appear one by one. The desert sky was a wonder, so wide and endless that it could make a man feel smaller than a grain of sand. He found himself thinking about the 3 women again, the way they laughed before they saw him, the shock in their eyes. The youngest one, the one who had cried out first, she had eyes the color of amber and a face full of life. He remembered that, and it troubled him. He didn't want to be remembered as some intruder. He had not come to hurt or offend. He was just a man trying to survive, but miles away, in a quiet Apache camp near the same sacred lake. The story was being told very differently. The 3 women sat beside the fire, wrapped in blankets, speaking in low voices. They were sisters. Nayeli, the oldest, was calm and strong. Sani, the middle one, was thoughtful and quiet. And Alona, the youngest, was fiery and quick to speak. Their father, Taza, was the tribe's elder, and a man of great respect. He listened as his daughters told him what had happened, how a stranger had come upon them by the sacred lake. Taza's face was unreadable. When they finished, he looked into the fire for a long time before speaking. "You say he did not speak a word before he left?" He looked shocked, Nayeli said softly, like he did not mean to see us. "But the law is the law." Sani nodded in agreement. If he was a good man, he would have turned away sooner. If he was not, then the spirits must decide. Alona spoke sharply, her anger not yet cooled. "He looked right at us. He must pay." Taza raised a hand. "No blood will be shed unless it must. But the spirits will be angry if we do nothing. A man who sees what he should not must restore the balance. The law says he must marry the ones he has dishonored." The women exchanged uneasy looks. It was the old way, a tradition few questioned. To outsiders it might have seemed strange, but to the Apache, it was a sacred rule meant to protect a woman's dignity and the tribe's honor. Taza called for 10 of his best riders. "Find this man," he said. "Bring him back alive. He will answer for what he has done before the Council of Elders." By the next morning, they were gone. Back in the desert, Clayton woke to the sound of approaching horses. He had barely enough time to grab his rifle before they were upon him. From every direction came riders, faces painted, bows drawn. Dusty reared and snorted, frightened by the sudden movement. Clayton raised his hands. "I don't want trouble," he called out. One of the riders, and a tall man with eagle feathers in his hair, rode forward. His eyes were sharp and full of judgment. "You are the white man who was at the sacred water." Clayton nodded slowly. "I was looking for water. I didn't know anyone was there." The man's face did not soften. "You saw what is forbidden. You must come." Clayton hesitated, glancing toward the open desert behind them. But he knew he couldn't outrun 10 men in their own land. So he lowered his hands and said, "All right, I'll go." They took his weapons but did not harm him. Instead, they tied Dusty's reins to one of their horses and led him south, through the canyons and toward the hidden valley where the tribe lived. The journey took hours, but as they neared the camp, the tension in the air grew thicker. When they arrived, the entire village seemed to pause and look. Children stopped playing and women paused their work, their eyes following the stranger. Clayton kept his head down. Taza stood waiting by the central fire, his daughters nearby. He was tall, with silver hair and the steady gaze of a man who had seen more than most. Clayton was brought before him. "I am Taza," the elder said. "My daughters were at the lake. You saw them when you should not have. Our laws are clear. Do you deny it?" Clayton shook his head. No, I saw them. But it was by accident. I swear it, the camp was silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Taza looked at him for a long time. You may not have meant harm, but the law is not about meaning, it is about balance. What is seen cannot be unseen, and what is broken must be made whole again. Clayton swallowed hard. What does that mean for me? The elder's eyes softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. It means you will not die today, but you must make things right. You will marry the ones you saw, my daughters, and live among us to restore what was lost. Clayton stared at him, stunned. Marry them? All three? It is our way, Taza said calmly. If you refuse, you will bring shame upon them, and upon yourself. The spirits will not forgive such things. Clayton's mind spun. He had expected anger, maybe even punishment. But this was something he could never have imagined. He looked at the three women, standing together in silence. Their faces were unreadable, but in their eyes he saw both pride and fear. For a moment he thought of refusing, of trying to escape. But the desert stretched for miles in every direction, and he knew the Apache would track him down easily. Finally, he said quietly, if that's what it takes to make peace, then I'll do it. Taza nodded once. Then the balance will be restored. The fire crackled as the tribe murmured among themselves. The decision was made. In the days to come, a ceremony would be held beneath the moon, a ceremony that would bind a cowboy and three Apache, sisters in a way none of them could have foreseen. And so began a story that would live in whispers and legends, the story of a wandering man who sought water and instead found a destiny he never asked for. He was still in the Apache camp, watched by curious eyes wherever he went. The people didn't treat him cruelly, but they kept their distance. To them, he was a stranger, a man who had broken a sacred rule and was now living among them by fate, not choice. Clayton tried to be respectful. He spoke little, moved carefully, and did what he could to show he meant no harm. But he could feel the weight of their gazes, not angry but heavy with caution and wonder. They were waiting to see if he would keep his word. Every morning the camp awoke with the first light of dawn. Women began preparing food, children played near the fires, and men rode out for hunting or scouting. The air was filled with the smell of wood smoke and roasted corn. The sound of drums sometimes echoed from the far hills. Clayton stayed mostly near the center of the camp where Taza, the elder, had told him to remain. The old man visited him often, speaking calmly but firmly. You are not our prisoner, Taza said one morning, his deep voice like the sound of thunder rolling far away. But you are bound by promise. The spirits have seen your heart, and now they will see your actions. A man's truth is not in what he says. It is in what he does. Clayton nodded, though he wasn't sure what his truth was anymore. He had once thought he understood his life. The road, the horse beneath him, the horizon always calling him forward. But here, in this quiet place, surrounded by people who spoke a language of honor and spirit, he felt like a lost boy again. The three sisters, Nayeli, Sani, and Alona, kept mostly to themselves. They spoke softly to one another and avoided looking at him for long. But Clayton noticed small things about them each day, things that made them real to him, not just figures in a strange custom. Nayeli, the oldest, was wise and graceful. She helped her father with tribal matters and carried herself with calm dignity. Her voice was soft but steady, and when she spoke, people listened. Sani, the middle sister, was quiet and thoughtful. She often sat by the river weaving baskets or singing low songs to herself. Her kindness showed in her eyes, warm, patient, and curious. Alona, the youngest, was full of fire. She laughed easily but spoke with sharp honesty. She had been the one most upset when Clayton was brought to the camp, and her eyes still held a spark of challenge whenever she looked at him. Clayton respected all three, though he hardly knew them. Sometimes, when he saw them together, he wondered what their lives had been like before he came along, how peaceful their world must have been before he stumbled into it by accident. As the days passed, the preparations for the marriage began. It was a ceremony that blended love, tradition, and spirit, and something sacred to the Apache, meant not just to join people but to restore balance in the eyes of nature. Clayton was given a small tent near the elder's lodge, where he was to stay until the full moon. During this time, he was taught the customs he would need to understand. An older man named Chato, who spoke some English, was assigned to guide him. Chato was patient and wise with a kind smile. "You are lucky," Chato told him one evening as they sat near the fire. "Taza could have chosen a harder path for you, but he believes in second chances. He believes the spirits brought you here for a reason." Clayton gave a tired smile. "I don't know about that. I've made more mistakes than I can count. This one might just be the strangest," Chato chuckled. "Strange things often carry the deepest lessons." He showed Clayton how to greet others with respect, how to listen before speaking, and how to offer gratitude to the earth before taking anything from it, even water. "Every act has meaning," Chato said. "Even a mistake can become a blessing if the heart learns from it." Clayton found peace in these lessons. He still missed his horse, the open road, and the sound of the wind across the plains, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't running from anything. One evening, he was walking near the edge of the camp when he saw Sani by the river, gathering reeds for weaving. The water glowed golden in the sunset, and she looked calm and graceful, her dark hair moving with the breeze. He hesitated, but then walked closer. "Evening," he said softly. Sani looked up surprised. "Good evening, cowboy," he smiled faintly. "You speak my language?" "Only a little," she said shyly. "My father taught us some words." He nodded, crouching near the water. "You all must think I'm the biggest fool this land's ever seen." She didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at him with gentle eyes. "You did not mean harm, but meaning does not always protect us from what follows." Her words struck him like truth carved in stone. He looked down at the reflection of the fading sky in the water. "I didn't want to bring trouble here." "You didn't bring trouble," she said softly. "You brought change. Sometimes that is the same thing." He turned toward her, and for the first time since arriving, he saw understanding instead of judgment. From that day, Sani became his quiet friend. She helped him learn a few Apache words each day, the names of trees, animals, and stars. She explained their meanings and how each thing carried a spirit of its own. Through her, he began to understand what the tribe saw in the world: a connection between all living things, a respect that went deeper than words. Nayeli also began to speak with him, though her manner was formal. She would ask him about his travels, about the towns he'd seen, and about the world beyond the desert. "You have seen far," she said once, "but seeing far does not mean knowing deeply." Clayton had no answer for that. Only Alona kept her distance. When she did speak to him, her tone was sharp. "You don't belong here," she said one morning while helping her sisters prepare baskets. "I know," he replied quietly. "But I'm trying." She didn't look at him. "Trying is not enough. People try before they fail." He wanted to respond but didn't. He understood her anger. He had taken away their peace, even if by accident, and now they were being asked to share their lives with a stranger. Days turned into weeks. The full moon was approaching. The air in the camp grew busier as people prepared for the ceremony. Drums were repaired, food was gathered, and cloth dyed in rich colors. Clayton felt both dread and calm. Part of him still couldn't believe what was happening, that he, a cowboy with no home and no plan, was about to be joined to 3 women of a proud tribe he barely knew. But another part of him felt that something important was waiting, something bigger than himself. The night before the ceremony, Taza came to him once more. The elder's face was calm but serious. "You have walked among us without fear," Taza said. "You have shown respect. The spirits see this. Tomorrow, under the full moon, you will no longer be a stranger. You will be part of this land and of us." Clayton lowered his head. "I still don't know if I deserve that." Taza placed a hand on his shoulder. "No man is born deserving, but he becomes worthy through what he does after his mistakes. The lake brought you here not to shame you, though, but to change you." That night, Clayton couldn't sleep. He sat outside his tent looking up at the stars. The desert was alive with soft sounds, the hum of crickets, the whisper of wind through the grass, the distant echo of a drum. He thought of his old life, the endless trails, the lonely nights, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the dark. And then he thought of the faces he had seen here, kind, proud, and real. He realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. As the moon rose high and silver light touched the land, Clayton made a quiet promise to himself. No matter what happened tomorrow, he would honor their trust. He would live with honesty. He would not be the man who wandered forever. He didn't know yet. But this promise, simple and sincere, would mark the true turning point of his life. Because in the days that followed, the cowboy who once rode alone would find a home, a purpose, and a kind of love that grew not from chance, but from understanding. The full moon rose high over the desert that night, lighting the land in silver. The wind was soft and carried the scent of sagebrush and firewood. The Apache camp was alive with quiet excitement. Voices murmured, drums beat slowly, and the people gathered near the sacred fire. Clayton Reeves stood near the edge of the circle, feeling both humbled and unsure. He wore clothes that the women of the tribe had made for him. A simple tunic of soft deerskin with beaded edges, and a necklace carved from bone and turquoise. It wasn't what he was used to, but it felt meaningful. Like every stitch carried a message. Across from him stood the three sisters, Nayeli, Thani, and Alona. They were dressed in ceremonial gowns that glowed under the moonlight. Each wore flowers braided into her dark hair, and their faces carried calm strength. Clayton looked at them and felt a mix of fear, respect, and gratitude. He still couldn't understand how his life had led him here, but he knew now that this moment was no punishment. It was a new beginning. Taza, the elder, stepped into the circle. His voice was low but powerful, carrying easily through the night. "Tonight," he said, "the balance is restored. The lake brought a stranger to us, and the spirits have tested him. He has shown patience, humility, and truth. Now he will walk not as an outsider, but as one of us." The people murmured in agreement, their faces lit by the dancing firelight. Then came the ceremony. It was not like any wedding Clayton had ever heard of. There were no rings or papers, only prayers, songs, and the sharing of water from a clay bowl. The water came from the very lake where they had first met, carried carefully by the sisters earlier that day. Each sister took a turn dipping her hands into the bowl, letting the cool drops fall into the fire. The flames hissed softly, sending white smoke into the air. Nayeli spoke first. "This water saw us on the day fate changed. Let it remind us that even mistakes can become blessings." Sani added, "May the fire burn away fear and keep only understanding." Alona hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Clayton. Her tone was quiet but honest. "May truth live longer than anger." Taza handed the bowl to Clayton. "Drink," he said. "Let the water join your spirit with theirs." Clayton lifted the bowl and drank. The water was cool and tasted faintly of earth and sky. When he lowered it, the tribe began to sing, a slow, rhythmic chant that echoed through the valley. As the sound grew, he felt something inside him shift. Not just relief, but peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't drifting. He belonged somewhere. When the ceremony ended, the people celebrated with food and gentle laughter. Children danced and old women told stories around the fires. Clayton sat with Taza's family, feeling both nervous and grateful. The three sisters sat across from him, their faces glowing in the light. Nayeli smiled kindly. "The spirits have accepted you," she said. Sani nodded. "You are one of us now." Even Alona, though still reserved, gave a small nod before looking away. Clayton smiled. "I'll do my best to deserve that." In the days that followed, life began to settle into a rhythm. The camp returned to its usual routines, and Clayton found himself slowly becoming part of it. He helped the men gather firewood, mend fences, and care for the horses. He was surprised to learn how much the Apache valued their animals, not just as tools, but as companions with spirits of their own. The more time he spent among them, the more he understood their way of life. They moved with nature instead of fighting against it. They took only what they needed, shared what they had, and gave thanks for everything, even small things like rain or shade. At first, some of the younger men kept their distance. They were unsure how to treat this cowboy who had suddenly become family, but as days turned into weeks, they began to respect his hard work and quiet nature. Clayton never boasted or complained. He listened more than he spoke. And slowly, their suspicion turned into acceptance. He learned new skills, too. How to track deer by the smallest footprints, how to read the wind, and how to listen to the night. Sani often joined him when he worked by the river, teaching him words in her language. He tried to repeat them carefully, and she would laugh gently when he got them wrong. One afternoon he found Nayeli teaching children near the edge of the camp. She spoke of stars and stories, how each constellation had a spirit and a lesson to share. Clayton sat quietly nearby, listening, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. But it was Alona who changed him the most. At first, she kept her distance. She spoke to him only when necessary and often with sharp words. But one evening, when a storm rolled over the desert, she came to him by the stables where he was securing the horses. "The wind will grow stronger," she said, helping him tie the ropes. "These storms come fast. I've seen storms before," he said with a grin. "But I don't think I've seen one like this." She gave a small laugh, the first he had ever heard from her. "No, not like this." Lightning flashed across the sky and rain began to fall in silver sheets. They ran inside, soaked but smiling. For the first time she looked at him without anger. "You work hard," she said softly. "My father was right about you." Clayton looked at her. "I didn't come here to take anything from you. I just want to make things right." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe you already have." From that night on, Alona spoke to him more often. She was still fiery and direct, but her tone had softened. Sometimes, she even teased him about his awkward Apache pronunciation or his way of handling tools. "You're a cowboy," she'd laugh, "but you build fences like a mountain goat." Their friendship grew naturally, just as his bond with Sani deepened through quiet kindness, and Nayeli's wisdom guided him daily. Each sister had a different way of teaching him something important: patience, understanding, and courage. As months passed, Clayton began to forget what it felt like to be an outsider. The tribe became his family. He joined them in their celebrations, helped with their harvests, and rode with the hunters during the long summer days. He felt pride when the children called him brother, and peace when Taza spoke to him like a son. Sometimes he would ride out alone to the lake, the same lake where everything had begun. The water still sparkled in the sunlight, calm and endless. He would sit by the shore and remember that first day, his thirst, his mistake, and how it had led him to this life. It amazed him how something that started as shame had become a blessing. One evening, as the sun was setting behind the red cliffs, Clayton sat with the three sisters by the fire. The air was soft and golden. Sani was weaving, Nayeli was grinding corn, and Alona was humming a song. Clayton looked at them, his voice quiet. "When I first came here, I thought I'd lost my freedom. But I see now I found something better, a reason to stay." Nayeli smiled. "Freedom is not only about moving. Sometimes it's about belonging," Sani added softly. "You found water when you were thirsty. Now you have found peace when your heart was dry." Alona looked at him, her eyes full of warmth. "You saw us once by accident," she said. "Now you see us with understanding. That is the difference." Clayton felt his chest tighten with gratitude. He nodded, unable to find the right words. That night he looked at the stars and thought about how life had brought him here. Not by design, but by destiny. The cowboy who once drifted alone had become part of a story larger than himself. One written not in dust and regret, but in love, honor, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. From then on, the people no longer called him the stranger. They called him Nantan, meaning leader or man of honor. And though the desert still stretched endlessly around them, Clayton Reeves no longer felt lost in it. The land that once tested him now held him close. He had come searching for water. Instead, he had found a home. Years passed quietly in the valley, and time shaped the land just as it shaped the hearts of those who lived there. The seasons came and went like slow, gentle songs. The heat of summer, the golden calm of autumn, the cool breath of winter, and the bright rebirth of spring. Clayton Reeves was no longer a stranger or a drifter. He had become part of the Apache village in every way that mattered. His skin had grown darker under the desert sun. His hair had silver threads now, and the deep lines on his face carried stories. Stories of peace, family, and belonging. The people called him Nantan, the name that meant leader or man of honor. It was not a title he ever asked for, but one that had found him naturally through years of quiet kindness and steady work. He still remembered the day he arrived, lost, thirsty, and uncertain. Now he was a husband, a father, and a friend to many. The man who had once wandered without direction had found his path, not through luck or wealth, but through love and humility. His three wives, Nayeli, Sani, and Alona, each held a part of his heart in their own way. Nayeli was his anchor, the voice of wisdom who guided not just him but the whole family. Sani was the calm between storms, her kindness touching everyone who came near. Alona remained fiery and full of laughter, the spark that kept their home alive with energy and light. Together, they built a family that reflected the spirit of both worlds, the cowboys' endurance and the Apache's grace. Their children grew up strong, learning to ride horses as easily as they spoke both English and Apache. They learned from their father how to work the land and from their mothers how to honor it. Clayton often sat by the fire at night, listening to his children's laughter and the sound of drums in the distance. Those moments reminded him of how far he had come. Once he had chased freedom on horseback, thinking it meant distance and silence. Now he knew that true freedom came from peace inside the heart. The people of the tribe grew to love him as one of their own. He helped settle disputes, built homes, and taught some of the young men how to care for the horses he had brought from the towns. In return, they taught him to see the world not through fear or pride, but through harmony, to see the land not as something to conquer, but something to protect. One summer, when the rains came late, the crops began to dry. The ground cracked and the river that once sang with water turned quiet and still. The people grew worried. Clayton watched them gather around Taza, now an old man whose steps had slowed but whose spirit was still bright. "The land is testing us," Taza said. "It asks for faith, not fear." Clayton nodded and spoke up. "Then we must work harder together. The earth gives when we give to it." He led the men in digging new channels to guide water from distant streams, while the women and children gathered seeds to plant again when the soil softened. For weeks they labored under the hot sun, and slowly clouds began to return. The rain fell at last, washing over the valley like a blessing. That night, when thunder rolled across the mountains, the people sang around the fires. Taza looked at Clayton with pride and said, "You came here as a stranger. Now even the rain listens when you speak." Clayton smiled, but his heart was humble. "I only did what any man should do for his home." Years later, when Taza passed away peacefully, it was Clayton who stood before the people and spoke. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of love and gratitude. He taught me that the desert is not empty, it is full of lessons. And he showed me that family is not only born in blood, but in respect. The tribe honored Taza's memory, and life went on, steady and full. Sometimes, travelers passing through the region would hear about the white man who lived with the Apache, a man who had once been a cowboy and now lived as one of the tribe. Few believed it at first. Some came out of curiosity, others with judgment in their hearts. But when they met Clayton, they saw no stranger, only a man who belonged completely to the land and its people. He treated everyone with kindness, offered them food, and spoke of peace instead of conflict. He would say, "The world is wide enough for all of us, if we stop trying to own it." The travelers would ride away changed, carrying with them the story of a cowboy who found something greater than adventure. He found harmony. As the years rolled on, Clayton's children grew up and began their own families. His sons were strong riders and skilled hunters. His daughters learned their mother's crafts and songs. Each one carried a piece of both worlds, the courage of the plains and the spirit of the desert. The lake that had once been the place of his greatest mistake became a place of peace for the whole family. They would gather there often to swim, to fish, or to watch the sun set over the water. The lake had forgiven him long ago, and he often said it was the truest friend he ever had. Sometimes, as he sat by the shore, he thought of the past, the lonely roads, the long rides under a burning sun, the quiet nights when he had only the stars for company. He wondered how different his life might have been if he had chosen to ride away that day, instead of staying to face the consequences. He smiled to himself, knowing the answer. If he had ridden away, he would still be wandering. He would still be thirsty not for water, but for meaning. The lake hadn't just quenched his thirst, it had led him home. One spring morning, as the sun rose pink and gold across the sky, Clayton walked out to the edge of the lake. His hair had turned almost white now, and his steps were slow but steady. The air was cool, and the surface of the water was still. Nayeli joined him, her face lined with time, but still beautiful and full of grace. She placed her hand in his. "You came here many years ago," she said softly. "The spirits must smile when they see what became of that day." Clayton looked across the water. I came here by accident, he said. But maybe the lake knew something I didn't. She smiled. It always did. He nodded and felt peace settle deep within him. The sun climbed higher, and the sound of children laughing echoed through the valley, their grandchildren playing by the trees. It was a sound of life continuing, of the world turning gently onward. In that moment, Clayton felt grateful for every choice, every mistake, every turn of the trail that had led him here. He realized that love wasn't always born from perfect moments. Sometimes it began with misunderstanding, with fear, or with something unexpected. But if the heart stayed true, even broken paths could lead to something whole. When the wind rose, he closed his eyes and listened. It carried the voices of the people, the songs of the past, and the whisper of the water. And he smiled, not the tired smile of a man who had seen too much, but the peaceful smile of someone who had finally found what he was looking for. Years later, long after Clayton had passed, travelers would still hear stories whispered by the Apache elders. They would say that once long ago a cowboy rode through the desert searching for water and found instead a family, a home and a life that touched two worlds. They said that on quiet nights, when the moon was full, you could still see his figure by the lake, sitting on a rock, hat in hand, watching the water shimmer under the stars. And if you listened closely, you might hear his voice in the wind saying softly, "Peace isn't found on the road, it's found in the heart."